The rifle scope trembled against Marcus Webb's eye as he peered through the frost-crusted cabin window. Inside, femur bones jutted from metal buckets like grotesque bouquets. This discovery in Alaska's remote Denali wilderness would expose a family's 17-year feeding ritual that transformed missing hikers into dinner-table conversations. October 15th, 1997. The morning air carried the metallic tang of early snow mixed with something Webb couldn't identify, something that made his stomach clench. His hunting partner, Dave Richardson, had gone silent beside the cabin's weathered door. Through the gaps in the rotting wood planks, they could see movement inside. Human shapes shuffling between makeshift tables covered in white fragments. Webb and Richardson had been tracking a wounded moose for 3 hours when they stumbled upon the isolated structure. No roads led here, no trails marked on any map, just 47 miles of untouched wilderness separating this place from the nearest settlement of Kontishna. The cabin sat in a natural depression, hidden by a ring of black spruce that seemed to lean inward like protective fingers. "Jesus Christ, Dave." Webb's whisper cut through the silence. "Are those people eating?" Before I continue, drop a comment below and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is in your world right now. If this story hooks you, smash that like button and hit subscribe. We're just getting started, and the deeper we dig, the darker this gets. The Hartwell family had lived in this forgotten pocket of Alaska since 1980. Robert Hartwell, 53, had moved his wife Sarah and their twin sons, Michael and Thomas, here after losing his job at the Anchorage fish processing plant. Official records showed they'd purchased the land through a private sale, cash only, no inspections required. What the records didn't show was why a family would choose to live so far from civilization that supply runs required a 3-day hike. Through the scope, Webb watched Sarah Hartwell methodically crack what appeared to be a human tibia with a granite stone. Her movements were practiced, efficient. Beside her, the teenage twins sorted smaller bones into separate piles, while their father Robert tended a cast-iron pot that bubbled with an unidentifiable stew. "We need to get out of here," Richardson whispered, but his feet remained planted in the snow. That hesitation would haunt him for decades, because as they watched, they witnessed something that would redefine their understanding of human hunger. The family wasn't just eating, they were celebrating, laughing, passing bowls of their grotesque meal between them like any normal family sharing Sunday dinner. The bone collectors had perfected their craft. Webb's radio crackled to life. Alaska State Trooper dispatch requesting a status update on their hunting expedition. The sound shattered the morning silence like a gunshot. Inside the Sanchoku cabin, all movement stopped. 4 heads turned toward the window in perfect unison. Robert Hartwell's eyes locked with Webb's through the rifle scope. For 3 heartbeats, neither man moved. Then Robert smiled, a genuine, welcoming expression that somehow made everything infinitely worse. He raised his hand and waved, as if greeting an old friend who'd come to visit. "They see us," Webb breathed into his radio. "We need immediate backup at coordinates 63 degrees, 42 minutes north." But backup was 73 miles away through terrain that would take search and rescue teams at least 18 hours to traverse. Webb and Richardson were alone with a family who had just invited them to join their meal. What would you do when hospitality becomes horror, and the only witnesses are the bones themselves? The cabin door creaked open, and Robert Hartwell stepped into the morning light, still wearing that impossible smile. Robert Hartwell's bare feet left bloody prints in the October snow as he approached the hunters with open arms. His smile never wavered, even as steam rose from the warm bones clutched in his frost-bitten hands. What the hunters discovered next would reveal how a family's isolation had transformed basic survival into ritualistic consumption spanning nearly 2 decades. "Welcome, friends." Robert's voice carried the practiced warmth of a small-town pastor greeting Sunday parishioners. "You look cold. Sarah's got a fresh pot going. Plenty for everyone." Webb's finger found his rifle's safety, but something in Robert's demeanor made him hesitate. This wasn't the behavior of someone caught in a criminal act. This was genuine hospitality. Robert Hartwell truly believed he was being neighborly. Behind him, Sarah emerged from the cabin carrying a wooden bowl that steamed in the frigid air. Her gray hair was neatly braided, her flannel shirt clean despite the circumstances. She looked like any frontier mother welcoming unexpected guests. The twins followed, wiping their hands on cloth rags, their teenage faces bright with curiosity about the visitors. "You're the first folks we've seen in, 6 months now," Sarah called out. "Where you boys headed?" Richardson found his voice first. "Just tracking a wounded moose, ma'am. Didn't mean to disturb your breakfast." "Breakfast?" Robert laughed, a sound that echoed strangely in the wilderness. "Son, this is our evening meal. We keep mountain time here. Dinner when the sun hits the spruce tops, sleep when it disappears behind the peaks. Family dinner at 3 in the afternoon." Webb's radio crackled again. This time, the static revealed fragments of a missing persons report from Fairbanks. 3 hikers overdue from a backcountry expedition. Last seen heading toward Denali's restricted zones. The Hartwell family had established their own ecosystem of survival through what they called providence hunting. According to Robert's later confession, they never actively pursued victims. Instead, they waited for lost travelers to find them, exhausted, hypothermic, desperate for shelter. The family would offer warmth, food, and rest. Most guests stayed for days, recovering their strength. They never left. "The mountain provides," Robert explained to the hunters, his tone carrying the reverence of someone discussing divine intervention. "Always has. We just learned to accept its gifts with proper gratitude." Inside the cabin, Webb could see dozens of backpacks hanging from wooden pegs, hiking boots arranged in neat rows, water bottles, sleeping bags, and camping gear sorted with military precision. Each item tagged with dates spanning back to 1981. The accumulation of 17 years. Michael Hartwell, the older twin by 4 minutes, approached Webb with the easy confidence of someone accustomed to meeting strangers. "Dad says you're hunters. We hunt too, but different game. Want to see our trophy room?" Before Webb could respond, Thomas grabbed Richardson's arm with surprising strength. "Come on, mister. You'll love what we've collected." The twins' enthusiasm was infectious, disturbing in its complete normalcy. They spoke about their family's activities with the pride children typically reserved for discussing baseball trophies or science fair ribbons. There was no awareness that their lifestyle deviated from societal norms. How does a family lose all connection to moral boundaries while maintaining the warm dynamics of suburban domesticity? Richardson made the choice that sealed their fate. Instead of backing away, instead of making excuses and retreating to call for immediate reinforcements, he followed Thomas toward the cabin. "Just for a minute," he told Webb. "We need to see what we're dealing with." The wooden door swung open, revealing the Hartwell family's 17-year collection. The cabin's interior hit Richardson like a physical blow. The sweet, sick smell of old marrow mixed with wood smoke, while animal pelts covered walls lined with human skulls arranged by size. His boots stuck slightly to the floor with each step. Inside this 40 by 20-foot space, the Hartwell family had created a museum dedicated to their unique interpretation of Alaskan frontier justice. The skulls weren't random trophies. Each one bore a small wooden placard with carved details. Jenny Morrison, lost hiker, July 85, and Bill Crawford, injured climber, September 92. The family had maintained meticulous records of every person who'd accepted their hospitality. Webb counted 43 placards before he stopped counting. Sarah noticed his attention to the display. Robert insists on proper documentation, she explained while stirring her pot. Says if we're going to honor these folks, we should remember their names. Most of them were so grateful for our help in their final days. The twins led Richardson deeper into the cabin's single room, pointing out their favorite pieces with the enthusiasm of tour guides. Michael gestured toward a collection of femur bones that had been carved with intricate patterns. Dad taught us scrimshaw using whale techniques, he said proudly. But these hold the carving better than whalebone. Traditional craftsmanship meets unprecedented material. Thomas opened a wooden chest filled with jewelry, watches, and personal effects. Each item was polished and carefully maintained. We keep everything that matters to them, he explained. Dad says it's important to preserve their memory. But preservation and consumption created a disturbing paradox in the Hartwell household. They genuinely mourned each person they consumed, holding what Sarah called celebration dinners to honor the deceased. The family would share stories about their guests' lives, read from discovered journals, and toast their contributions to the family's survival. Alaska State Trooper files would later reveal that the Hartwell family had developed elaborate backstories for many of their victims based on personal belongings and diary entries. They knew Jennifer Morrison had been hiking to scatter her father's ashes. They understood that Bill Crawford was attempting to climb Denali to honor his deceased brother's memory. The intimacy made everything worse. People think wilderness living is about fighting nature, Robert explained, settling into a handmade chair crafted from what appeared to be reassembled camping equipment. But it's really about accepting what nature provides. We don't waste anything here. Every part serves a purpose. He gestured toward the cabin's construction. The walls incorporated materials from dozens of backpacks, stitched and layered for insulation. Tent poles had been repurposed as structural supports. Sleeping bags formed draft barriers around the windows. Webb realized they were sitting inside a monument built from the belongings of missing persons. Richardson's voice came out as a whisper. How long have you been doing this? Doing what? Sarah asked genuinely. Living off the land? Honoring the mountain's gifts? Since we moved here in '80. Though the first few years were lean, we nearly starved that first winter before we learned to accept providence. The family's first victim had been a solo hiker named David Chen, who'd stumbled into their camp during a November blizzard in 1981. According to Robert's later testimony, Chen had severe frostbite and internal injuries from a fall. They'd tried to save him using basic first aid, but he died during his third night with them. We couldn't let him go to waste, Robert had explained to investigators. Not when we had the twins to feed and winter coming hard. What begins as desperate survival, and when does necessity transform into preference? That first taste had changed everything. Not just the nutrition, but the emotional comfort. The feeling that David Chen was still with them, still providing for their family. By spring, they were actively hoping for more providence. Webb's radio crackled with another missing persons alert. This time, a family of 4 overdue from a camping trip near Kantishna. The Hartwells exchanged meaningful glances. "Sounds like more folks might be needing help soon," Robert said, his smile widening. Webb's blood turned to ice water as he listened to the radio description. Family of 4, last seen heading toward the exact coordinates where he now stood. The Hartwells weren't just opportunistic cannibals. They were actively hunting. This revelation would expose a carefully orchestrated system that had claimed dozens of lives while maintaining the perfect cover of Alaskan wilderness accidents. The family's methodology was devastatingly simple. Robert would position himself along popular hiking trails during peak season, posing as a fellow outdoorsman who'd offer directions to lost travelers. He carried legitimate camping gear, wore weather-appropriate clothing, and possessed encyclopedic knowledge of the terrain. To exhausted hikers, he appeared as salvation. "The key is reading people's desperation," Robert later told investigators. "Someone who's been lost for 2 days will follow anyone who claims to know the way out." Sarah would have warm food prepared at the cabin, legitimate trail meals that smelled like safety to hypothermic travelers. The twins would share stories about growing up in the wilderness, creating an atmosphere of frontier hospitality that masked the family's true intentions. Missing persons reports filed between 1981 and 1997 showed a disturbing pattern. 47 separate incidents of hikers, climbers, and camping families who'd simply vanished in the Denali region. Search and rescue teams had attributed the disappearances to Alaska's unforgiving terrain. Avalanches, bear attacks, exposure, falls into hidden crevasses. The wilderness became the perfect alibi. "Most folks don't understand how easy it is to disappear out here," Michael explained to Richardson with disturbing casualness. "Even if someone comes looking, they're searching thousands of square miles, and bodies don't last long with the wildlife and weather." But the Hartwells had made one crucial mistake. They'd kept trophies from every victim, creating an evidence room that documented their crimes in meticulous detail. Webb photographed the skull collection while pretending to examine their scrimshaw work, using his hunting camera to capture the carved placards with names and dates. The evidence would prove invaluable. Thomas noticed Webb's photography. "You should get one of Dad teaching us the bone carving," he suggested enthusiastically. "He learned from an Inuit elder back when he worked in Anchorage. Says it's important to preserve traditional techniques." The normalization was complete. The Hartwell family genuinely believed they were maintaining cultural practices while honoring their victims through consumption. In their isolated worldview, they were performing a sacred duty that connected them to both the land and the people who died on it. Sarah began setting additional places at their crude wooden table. "You boys should stay for dinner," she insisted. "The stew's almost ready, and it's too dangerous to hike out after dark." Webb exchanged glances with Richardson. The invitation wasn't optional. "That's mighty generous," Webb replied carefully. "But our families will worry if we don't check in soon." "Families," Robert mused, his expression growing distant. "That's what this is all about, isn't it? Taking care of the people you love, making sure they have enough to survive another winter." The radio crackled again, this time with coordinates for a search and rescue operation. The missing family of 4 had activated an emergency beacon approximately 12 miles southeast of the Hartwell cabin. Rescue teams were mobilizing, but estimated arrival time was still 14 hours away. Robert's smile returned. "Sounds like those poor folks found themselves in real trouble. Lucky for them, we know every inch of this territory." He stood and reached for a worn pack hanging near the door. "Boys, looks like we've got Providence calling." The hunt was beginning. Webb realized with crystalline clarity that he and Richardson weren't just witnesses to the Hartwell family's crimes. They were about to become accomplices or victims. The family expected them to help with the rescue operation that would deliver 4 new sources of sustenance. What choice do you make when refusing to help means certain death, but helping means becoming complicit in murder? Sarah handed Robert a coil of rope and a medical kit that looked suspiciously well stocked for a family living 47 miles from civilization. "We'll be back before morning," Robert announced. "Sarah, keep our guests comfortable." The cabin door closed behind him and the twins, leaving Webb and Richardson alone with a woman who'd been preparing human remains for 17 years. Sarah Hartwell hummed softly while sharpening a bone-handled knife against a whetstone, the rhythmic scraping sound echoing through the cabin like a death march. Outside, darkness swallowed the wilderness whole. Webb and Richardson now faced 12 hours alone with a woman who'd perfected the art of making strangers feel welcome before they became ingredients. "Coffee?" Sarah offered, lifting a battered pot from the wood stove. The liquid inside was dark, almost black, with an oily sheen that caught the firelight. "Robert brings back beans whenever he finds them in folks' packs. This batch came from a nice young couple last spring." The casual reference to murdered hikers as suppliers made Webb's stomach clench. But refusing Sarah's hospitality might trigger suspicion. He accepted the cup with steady hands, letting the bitter liquid touch his lips without swallowing. Richardson sat rigid in his chair, photographing equipment spread across the table. Among the camping gear repurposed as kitchen tools, he spotted items that made his blood freeze. A pink water bottle with Jenny's Adventure Fund, written in marker, a compass engraved with Happy 25th Anniversary, and a child's stuffed bear wearing a tiny hiking vest. Families had died here. "You boys seem nervous," Sarah observed, settling into her mending. She was repairing a torn sleeping bag with practiced efficiency, her needle pulling bright thread through technical fabric. "First time this far from civilization?" Webb forced his voice to remain conversational. "Just concerned about that missing family. 12 miles isn't far in daylight, but at night." "Oh, Robert knows these mountains like his own backyard," Sarah interrupted. "Been walking these trails since we moved here. Never lost anyone he was trying to help." The statement was technically true, which made it infinitely more chilling. As the hours crawled past, Sarah shared stories about their life in the wilderness, with the comfortable rhythm of someone accustomed to entertaining guests. She described their first winter, when they'd nearly starved before learning to accept the mountain's gifts. She talked about teaching the twins to read using books found in visitors' backpacks, creating a curriculum from the personal libraries of the dead. Michael's favorite is a poetry collection from a graduate student who stayed with us in '86, she mentioned fondly. Emily Dickinson. That girl had excellent taste. Every anecdote contained another victim. Around midnight, Sarah excused herself to check what she called the preservation room, a lean-to structure attached to the cabin's rear wall. Through the thin wooden barrier, Webb could hear her moving heavy objects and testing the seal on what sounded like multiple containers. Richardson leaned close to Webb's ear. "We need to run." "They'll track us," Webb whispered back. "Robert knows every trail. We wouldn't make it 3 miles before they caught up. So we just sit here and wait to become dinner?" Before Webb could respond, Sarah returned carrying an armload of clean blankets that smelled faintly of lavender soap. "You boys should get some rest," she said. "Robert will want to start early once he gets back with those poor folks." The sleeping arrangements felt like a trap. Sarah had prepared bedrolls near the wood stove, positioning them so any movement toward the door would wake her. She'd given them blankets and pillows that had obviously belonged to previous guests, creating an intimacy with the dead that made sleep impossible. Webb lay motionless for hours, listening to Sarah's steady breathing and the wilderness sounds outside. Somewhere in that darkness, Robert and the twins were approaching a family of 4 who thought rescue was coming. At 4:37 a.m., voices carried through the forest. "Help! Please, we need help!" A woman's voice, desperate and exhausted. "Over here," Robert's reply, calm and reassuring. "We got your beacon signal. Everything's going to be fine now." Sarah sat up immediately, her movements quick and purposeful. She began preparing the cabin for new guests, lighting additional oil lamps and setting water to boil. The ritual was clearly practiced, performed dozens of times before. "Sounds like Robert found them," she announced cheerfully. "Poor things probably haven't eaten a proper meal in days." Through the cabin window, Webb watched 4 figures emerge from the tree line. A man and woman in their 30s, followed by 2 children who couldn't have been older than 8 and 10. They stumbled through the snow with the desperate relief of people who'd given up hope. Behind them, Robert and the twins herded them forward like sheep. The Anderson family from Fairbanks had been camping in Denali National Park when their youngest child developed what appeared to be appendicitis. They'd hiked for 2 days trying to reach help, carrying their sick daughter through increasingly difficult terrain. What they'd found instead was the Hartwell family's carefully orchestrated rescue operation. "Thank God," Mrs. Anderson sobbed as Robert guided them toward the cabin. "Our daughter needs a doctor. We have to get her to a hospital." "First things first," Robert replied soothingly. "Let's get everyone warm and fed. Then we'll figure out the best way to help your little girl." The cabin door opened, and Sarah greeted the Anderson family with the same maternal warmth she'd shown Webb and Richardson. But this time, Webb understood exactly what kind of help the Hartwells intended to provide. The Anderson family collapsed inside the cabin with the grateful exhaustion of people who believed their nightmare was ending. They had no idea it was just beginning. Within hours, Webb and Richardson would witness the Hartwell family's practiced routine transform rescue into ritualistic murder, revealing the true scope of their 17-year reign of terror. Mrs. Anderson cradled her fevered daughter, while Mr. Anderson explained their situation to Robert. 8-year-old Emma had developed severe abdominal pain 2 days earlier, forcing the family to abandon their planned camping trip and attempt an emergency evacuation. They'd been hiking toward the park boundary when darkness and exhaustion forced them to activate their emergency beacon. "Smart thinking," Robert nodded approvingly. "Though you picked a rough route. Most folks don't realize how easy it is to get turned around out here." Sarah immediately began fussing over the family, offering warm clothes and hot soup that smelled suspiciously like the stew Webb had watched her prepare earlier. The twins helped arrange sleeping areas while maintaining the cheerful demeanor of children excited to have visitors. Everything appeared normal, helpful, even heroic. But Webb noticed details that made his skin crawl. The way Robert positioned himself between the family and the door. How Sarah's eyes lingered on 10-year-old Tommy Anderson, mentally calculating weight and nutrition. The casual manner in which Michael and Thomas assessed the family's hiking gear, already planning its repurposing. The Andersons were being evaluated like livestock. "Emma needs real medical attention," Mr. Anderson insisted as his daughter's condition visibly worsened. "Is there any way to radio for helicopter evacuation?" "Radio's been acting up lately," Robert lied smoothly. "But don't worry. Sarah's got considerable medical experience. Raised 4 children out here before the twins came along. The mention of previous children sent ice through Webb's veins. There had been other family members, other children who'd lived in this cabin. What had happened to them? Sarah knelt beside Emma Anderson, feeling the child's forehead with practiced hands. "Definitely running a fever," she murmured. "Could be her appendix, but it might just be severe dehydration and exhaustion. I've got some herbs that should help with the pain." She disappeared into the preservation room, returning with a collection of dried plants and a small bottle of clear liquid. Webb watched her prepare a tea that steamed with medicinal aromatics. "This will help Emma sleep," Sarah explained to Mrs. Anderson. "Rest is the best medicine for children her age." The sedative would ensure Emma couldn't run when the family's true intentions became clear. As the hours passed, the Andersons began to relax. Robert regaled them with stories about wilderness survival, painting himself as a modern mountain man who'd chosen isolation over civilization. Sarah shared frontier cooking techniques while preparing what she claimed was venison stew. The twins demonstrated their bone-carving skills, presenting it as traditional Alaskan craftsmanship. The performance was flawless, convincing, even admirable. But Webb had seen the skull collection. He knew those carving materials weren't animal bones, and when Sarah ladled stew into wooden bowls, he recognized the same consistency and color as the meal she'd been preparing when they first arrived. The Andersons were eating human remains while praising Sarah's cooking. "This is incredible," Mr. Anderson told her between spoonfuls. "What kind of meat is this?" "Local game," Sarah replied with perfect honesty. "Hunted right here in these mountains." Mrs. Anderson nodded appreciatively. "It's so tender, almost sweet." Webb felt bile rise in his throat. He caught Richardson's eye and saw the same horrified understanding reflected there. They were watching a family unknowingly consume the flesh of previous victims while expressing gratitude for the meal. How do you warn people about danger when the warning itself might trigger the very violence you're trying to prevent? As darkness fell on their second night in the cabin, the Anderson family settled into sleeping arrangements near the wood stove. Emma's fever had broken thanks to Sarah's tea, and the family felt confident they could hike out safely in the morning. Robert waited until he was certain they were asleep before beginning his final preparations. He retrieved a collection of tools from a wooden chest Webb hadn't noticed before. Rope, knives, and restraints that showed signs of repeated use. The twins helped him arrange the implements with the efficiency of people performing a familiar routine. "Should we start with the parents or the children?" Michael whispered to his father. "Parents first," Robert replied quietly. "Less screaming that way." Sarah continued her mending as if discussing meal planning rather than murder methodology. This was how the Hartwell family had operated for 17 years, transforming killing into domestic routine, making murder as mundane as preparing breakfast. Webb realized that he and Richardson were about to become witnesses to a quadruple homicide, after which they would certainly become victims themselves. The bone collectors were preparing for their largest harvest yet. The rope whispered against itself as Robert Hartwell tested each knot, his movements precise in the flickering lamplight. Beside him, the sleeping Anderson family had no idea these would be their final moments of peace. But the Hartwell family's 17-year killing spree was about to end in a way that would baffle investigators and spawn decades of speculation about what really happened in that remote Alaskan cabin. Webb made his choice at 3:42 a.m. While Robert focused on preparing restraints and Sarah sorted her cutting tools, he caught Richardson's attention and pointed toward his radio. Richardson understood immediately. They had one chance to call for help before the massacre began. Webb activated his emergency beacon, while Richardson created a distraction by pretending to have a coughing fit. The signal transmitted their exact coordinates to Alaska state troopers, along with an automated distress code that would bring immediate helicopter response. But help was still hours away. Robert noticed the radio's activation light immediately. His expression shifted from domestic concentration to predatory alertness in an instant. "Problem, boys?" "Just checking our battery," Webb lied. "Want to make sure we can call for pickup tomorrow." Robert's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Tomorrow might be sooner than you think." The twins moved to flank Webb and Richardson, while Sarah continued her preparations with disturbing calm. The family had clearly dealt with uncooperative witnesses before. Their coordination suggested practice, experience, and complete confidence in their ability to handle 6 people instead of 4. Mrs. Anderson stirred in her sleep, perhaps sensing the shift in atmospheric tension. Her movement caused everyone in the cabin to freeze. For 30 seconds, the only sound was breathing and the wood stove's gentle crackling. Then Emma Anderson opened her eyes. The 8-year-old's gaze moved from her, sleeping parents, to the Hartwell family, standing over them with restraints and knives. Her young mind processed the scene with the clarity that only children possess when confronting absolute danger. She screamed. The sound shattered the cabin's careful quiet, like an explosion. Mrs. Anderson bolted upright, saw the knives, and began screaming herself. Mr. Anderson grabbed his son while scrambling for the door, only to find Michael Hartwell blocking his path with a bone-handled blade. Now, Robert said calmly, as if addressing misbehaving dinner guests. "Let's not make this harder than it needs to be." But the Anderson family's terror triggered something unexpected in the Hartwell household. Sarah dropped her cutting tools and backed toward the preservation room with genuine fear in her eyes. The twins exchanged glances that suggested confusion rather than predatory anticipation. For the first time in 17 years, the victims were fighting back before the drugs took effect. "Dad," Thomas whispered urgently. "The screaming will carry. Other folks might hear." Robert's careful methodology began unraveling. The family had always depended on sedated, compliant victims who couldn't resist or raise alarms. Active resistance wasn't part of their practiced routine. Mrs. Anderson grabbed a cast-iron pan from Sarah's cooking area and swung it at Michael's head, connecting with a sickening crack that sent the teenager sprawling. Mr. Anderson tackled Thomas while shouting for his family to run. The cabin erupted into chaos. Webb seized the moment to grab his rifle while Richardson helped the Anderson family reach the door. Outside, the October wilderness offered freezing temperatures and unknown terrain, but it was safer than remaining with the Hartwells. "The helicopter's coming," Webb shouted to Mr. Anderson. "Follow the beacon signal and keep moving south." Behind them, Robert Hartwell emerged from the cabin carrying a hunting rifle of his own. His calm demeanor had vanished, replaced by the focused intensity of someone whose carefully ordered world was collapsing. "You can't survive out there," he called after them. "It's 20 below zero. You'll freeze to death in an hour." But the Anderson family had already disappeared into the darkness, following Webb's emergency beacon toward the extraction point. Richardson covered their retreat, while Webb documented the cabin's interior with his camera, capturing evidence of the skull collection and bone carvings. The photographs would become crucial evidence in a case that would never reach trial. At dawn, Alaska state troopers arrived to find the cabin completely abandoned. No Hartwell family, no evidence of recent occupation. The skull collection had vanished. The bone carvings were gone. Even the preservation room had been stripped clean. Only the Anderson family's abandoned camping gear remained, along with Webb's photographs proving the horrors they'd witnessed. But Robert, Sarah, Michael, and Thomas Hartwell had vanished as completely as their victims once had. The official investigation lasted 6 months. Search teams combed thousands of square miles without finding any trace of the family. No bodies, no camps, no evidence they'd ever existed beyond the testimony of Webb, Richardson, and the Anderson family. Alaska state troopers theorized that the Hartwells had prepared multiple escape routes and hidden supply caches throughout the wilderness. But even experienced trackers couldn't explain how 4 people had disappeared so completely from such remote terrain during winter conditions. Some investigators suspected the family had died of exposure during their escape attempt. Others believed they'd reached a secondary hideout and continued their predatory lifestyle in an even more remote location. The bone collectors had mastered the art of vanishing. Today, hikers in Denali's backcountry occasionally report seeing a family matching the Hartwell description at the edges of campsites, always just beyond clear identification. The sightings are never confirmed, but missing persons reports in Alaska's wilderness continue to accumulate at statistically unusual rates. We're only scratching the surface. The next case is even darker. Subscribe before it drops.